got me. All right, well, good morning, everybody. Again, I've said that like 3 or 4 times now.
Yes, it is good morning.
Yes. All right. You have your Bible.
Yes.
If not, you may use the one in the pew, because that's the one that I'm using too. So we make it easy on ourselves this morning. I want to move this, but I don't want it to shock me. Okay, there it did shock me. Okay. Luke chapter 15. Luke chapter 15. There it is. We're actually going to be looking at verses 11 through 32 this morning, but I want to give the entire story. That's why I read you some context there this morning. So, backing up to those 3 verses, the context is that Jesus is gathered with tax collectors and sinners, and he's speaking with them, he's teaching, and he's telling stories. Also gathered in this crowd are a group of Pharisees, who these Pharisees still can't grasp throughout this whole narrative how Jesus could be associated with tax collectors and sinners. To them, it didn't make sense. So then Jesus tells 3 stories to illustrate the love of God and the true mission of all believers. So the first story, we know this one, the lost sheep, the story of the lost sheep, right? Where the shepherd leaves the flock of 99 and goes after and finds the one. And for many, that's a hard thing to believe, because if you had 99, why would you leave the 99 and go after the one? But it makes sense in the context of God when you realize that at one point in your life you were the one, and he left the 99 for you. The second one, the story of the lost coin, probably the least known out of these 3 parables here, where this person loses a coin and they tear up their entire house looking for it. You ever lost your car keys? And you went to great lengths to try and find them? This illustrates the length to which God would go to find you again, because you have personal value to him. And then the third story, the one that we're going to be focusing on today, starting in verse number 11, is commonly referred to, and you can see in your text, it's the parable of the lost son, or the parable of the prodigal son. At least that's how our English translation dubs it. And so many have heard the story, but I hope this morning to have a slightly different take upon it. And in my estimation, in my opinion, this is one of the best stories in the Bible to have memorized in order to share your faith about. Last night on Sunday night, I spoke about not just memorizing Bible verses, but memorizing Bible stories. Because stories shape people. Do you realize that our whole world is based upon stories? That's a side note. Like everything you do, you're kind of weaving the story of what God's doing in your life, and other people are trying to do their own story, and then everything getting pushed to you is story. But that's a whole other thing. Yet we try to combat stories with verses, so we should combat stories with stories. Fun thought there. But as we begin this morning, actually I want to take a moment and do this. Would you take a moment and close your eyes? Just do this with me. So start to picture this. You walk up in a crowd, and there's Jesus teaching. Can you see the tax collectors? Can you see the people? Can you see the Pharisees? Good. Okay, now we're using our senses. Keep your eyes closed. And now let's begin to listen to what Jesus, how he tells this story. So I'm going to read, and just imagine you're hearing Jesus tell this story. Then he said, "A certain man had 2 sons. And the younger of them said to his father, 'Father, give me the portion of goods that falls to me.' So he divided to them his livelihood. And not many days after, the younger son gathered all together, journeyed to a far country, and there wasted his possessions with prodigal living. But when he had spent all there arose a famine in that land, and he began to be in want. So then he went and joined himself to a citizen of that country, and he sent him into the fields to feed swine. And he would gladly have filled his stomach with the pods that the swine ate, and no one gave him anything. But when he came to himself, he said, How many of my father's hired servants have bread enough and to spare, and I perish with hunger? I will arise and go to my father, and will say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you, and I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me like one of your hired servants. And he arose and came to his father, but when he was still a great way off, his father saw him and had compassion, and ran and fell on his neck and kissed him. And the son said to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and in your sight, and am no longer worthy to be called your son. But the father said to his servants, Bring out the best robe and put it on him, and put a ring on his hand and sandals on his feet, and bring the fatted calf here and kill it, and let us eat and be merry. For this my son was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found. and they began to be merry. Now his older son was in the field, and he came and drew near to the house. He heard music and dancing. And so he called one of the servants and asked what these things meant. And he said to him, your brother has come, and because he has received him safe and sound, your father has killed the fatted calf. But he was angry and would not go in. Therefore his father came out and pleaded with him. So he answered and said to his father, lo, these many years I have been serving you. I never transgressed your commandment at any time, and yet you never gave me a younger goat, that I may make merry with my friends. But as soon as this son of yours came, who has devoured your livelihood with harlots, you killed the fatted calf for him. And he said to him, son, you are always with me, and all that I have is yours. It was right that we should make merry and be glad, for your brother was dead and is alive again, and was lost and is found. And so the title of my message this morning on Father's Day is The Forgiving Father. The Forgiving Father. Would you join me in prayer over the message this morning? Father God, thank you for this opportunity we get to open your word. Lord, thank you that you meet us in this place, and Lord, that you are a forgiving Father. So God, as we unpack this, would you speak to us? Lord, wherever we might be, Lord, would you speak life into our lives? We pray these things in your name, Jesus. Amen and amen. All right. First question this morning, there'll be multitudes of them. But have you ever made a decision that has backfired in your face? All right, good. Okay, we all can relate to this. I have a story from young Cody's life. I don't remember what had upset me, but something had upset me. I don't remember what. Maybe it was I played my Game Boy too much and it got taken away. Who knows? Or maybe I wasn't able to go outside to play because I might have not done my homework yet. I don't know what it was, but something upset me. You ever, when you're upset, make a poor decision worse? So in my upsettedness state, I decided to run to my room frustrated, and my bedroom window happened to be open, so I was like, that looks like it's good for a slamming. And so I slammed my bedroom window, and it blew up and backfired at me. Only time I've ever broken a window. Truthfully, I didn't throw anything in the window, I just slammed it in frustration. And so, no one was harmed in the making of that story, by the way. So no one got hurt. It was a moment of learning, and it backfired literally in my face. And I'm a quick learner because I've never made the choice again to slam a window. But we can all relate. There's something in our life where we've made a poor decision and it's backfired in our face. We could even relate to Pastor Brian, how not wearing safety goggles, the bite backfired in his face. I just thought of that sitting in the chair. So we're very relatable here. But so in our story of the son, we start in verse 11. He made a decision that backfired in his face. So let's look back at verse number 11. And so we know from the story, a certain man, he had two sons. So we're going to talk about the first son here. The younger of them said to his father, Father, give me the portion of goods that falls to me. So he divided them his livelihood. And so the son asked for his inheritance from his father, which, so in Jewish culture, this is insulting for one thing. Here's why. So the inheritance would not be distributed to the sons until the father had passed on. And so what the son was saying to the father in this moment of asking for the inheritance is that, Dad, you're dead to me. And so that was the insult of what is happening in this passage. And so we keep reading in verse 13, and not many days after the younger son gathered all together, journeyed to a far country, and there wasted his possessions with prodigal living. But when he had spent all, there arose a severe famine in that land, and he began to be in want. Then he went and joined himself to a citizen of that country, and he sent him into his fields to feed swine. And he would gladly have filled his stomach with the pods that the swine ate, but no one gave him anything. So the son took the inheritance, and he went and he lost it all on lavish living and on prodigal living, as we say here. And then he finds himself, after losing this inheritance, in the midst of a famine with no way to provide for himself. And so he takes a job feeding, it says in the text, swine, feeding pigs. And so pigs were actually considered to be unclean to the Jewish people. And so this was the bottom of the barrel of the jobs that the son could get. He had reached the lowest point here. So he even stoops as low to having to eat the food that the pigs eat in order to survive. That's where the son has gotten, from insulting his father to losing all of his inheritance. And now he's with pigs. So the first point I want to make this morning is this, is that the Father will allow you to make choices, even poor ones. The Father will allow you to make choices, even poor ones. So you notice how when the son asked for the inheritance, the Father gave it to him, even though he probably knew what it meant for the son. He didn't resist, he gave it to him. So the Father also knew what it meant when the son asked, how it was a regard that he was dead to him. And that very feeling could have affected the Father and could have hurt him. So how many times in our lives do you think we have made choices that have hurt our Heavenly Father? That's the perspective. And yet God still allows us to make these decisions. And why is that? I think it boils down to this because we're not robots. We are people. You know the difference between robots and people? That robots can be programmed to do what the Creator wants them to do. Where people are more dangerous because they can rebel against their Creator or be in relationship with their Creator. And so the Father created people. He didn't create robots. And the Father has allowed you to make choices in your life, good ones and bad ones. So the question to ponder today is this, is are you in rebellion or are you in relationship with your Heavenly Father? Are you in rebellion or are you in relationship with your Heavenly Father? Then moving to verse 17. The son says this, but when he came to himself, he said, how many of my father's hired servants have bread enough and to spare, and I perish with hunger? I will arise and go to my father, and will say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you, and I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me like one of your hired servants. So the son decides he's going to go back to his father's house, because even being a servant in the father's house is better than being stuck with pigs eating pig food, which I think we would agree with that. Yo, sidetrack. I saw this box of cookies at Ashley's parents' house one time, and I thought they were Oreos, and they were really dog food. And I almost ate them, but then I read the box closer, and I was like, oh, that would have been terrible. So, yeah, oops. This not that. So, back to the story. No, it wasn't. I hope dogs have better food than pigs, but who knows? I'm not a farmer. I think I would die if I was a farmer. I don't know. Sorry. I just got distracted here. I got distracted by dog snacks. Oh. So the illustration here of what the son says is like, it'd be better to be a servant in my father's house than to be where he is now. So this illustrates, in my belief, what a repentant heart looks like. It's a place of humility, realizing that the situation you are in is one that only another can get you out of. So for those of us who have made a decision to follow Jesus Christ, this is how you came to him, in a state of broken humbleness. I was thinking about this one too the other night. This is not in the notes, right? Do you ever think about where humility comes from? Doesn't it come from being humiliated slightly? Humility. Okay. I was like, oh, that's really interesting. And we can either be humble or we can get more prideful, vice versa. But that's a side note. And so the son decides, I'm going to come back to the father's house because it's better to be a servant than to be eating with pigs. And so then we look at how did the father respond to this. Verses 20 through 24. And he arose and came to his father, but when he was still a great way off, his father saw him and had compassion, and ran and fell on his neck and kissed him. And the son said to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and in your sight, and am no longer worthy to be called your son. But the father said to his servants, Bring out the best robe and put it on him, and put a ring on his hand and sandals on his feet, and bring the fatted calf here and kill it, and let us eat and be merry. For this my son was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found. And they began to be married. So the father, he sees his son coming from a long way off. What does it say in the text is that he runs out to greet him. And in Jewish culture, the act of running was not a common thing to see. In fact, it might not have happened very much in this kind of context. But the father was waiting and watching. He was so excited to see his son coming home. So he went out to meet him quickly. Then the son tries to give his plea to his father, but what does the father do? He stops him and he calls the servants into his house to bring together a big meal, a feast, because his son that was once lost is now found. And that's a reason to celebrate. See, the Father forgave the Son. And so the second point this morning is this, is that the Father's eyes are always upon you. He watches and he waits for us. The Father's eyes are always upon you. He watches and waits for us. So we're never told in the story how long the Son was gone. But what we can garner from it is that we know that the Father was watching for him. Because he saw him coming in the distance, and when he saw him, he went running out to him. And did you know that in our lives, there's nowhere we can go to get away from the sight and the presence of God? He can always see you. He knows right where you are, right when you are, and right what you are doing. To some, this can be frightening because you may be trying to hide something, but for others, it can be encouraging because God has never stopped watching, holding out hope that his sons and his daughters will come home, back home to him. So how many of you have ever had company come into town before, or had friends come over to your house, right? If you're like me, if company's coming, you tend to clean beforehand, right? Okay. Like these perfect houses we see on TV, like nobody lives like that. If you do, I commend you. But there's a lot of straightening that has to be done. And then when you're done with this period of cleaning, usually you have this period of waiting and watching. I like to sit on the couch at our house and wait to see the cars pull into the driveway. Sometimes it takes a little bit of time. But we like to wait and watch. I think that is what God does with you and I. He waits and he watches for his company to arrive. He waits and he watches for his company to arrive, and then when they do arrive, there's this massive celebration. And I think the story illustrates wonderfully what it looks like when a person who is dead in sin comes to know Jesus and is brought back to life. It is to be a massive celebration. Why? Because someone who was dead now has new life, and that's why we do what we do, to see new life. I'll share a story. I didn't write this in my notes, but I heard it one time. You guys know who Francis Chan is? Okay, I was listening to Francis Chan one time. Don't know where it was. It might have been on the internet, on YouTube, who knows. But he was telling the story about a ministry in San Francisco. Telling the story of this young man who was a part of a gang in San Francisco. And he came to be a part of a church community. He got saved, came to know Jesus, saved out of his situation. He was welcomed into the church. But Francis tells the story that as the man went along in his journey, the closeness and the welcomeness of the church went from, we're celebrating you're here, to hey, how you're doing, to like, okay, make sure this dude's here, he's here, cool. And eventually, this former gang member went back to his gang because he found that the gang was more like a family than the church was. And so, the interesting thing, as Francis was telling this, is that we as a church must realize that we're a part of God's family, and that's one of the things that brings us together, is the bridging and the bringing back of the family of God. And so it was this story of saying, like, look, hey guys, sometimes we get off mission and we start to think about other things than being a family, when really God's concerned about his sons and his daughters coming back to be a part of the family of God. So that was the illustration in that story there. Because when people come to know Christ, we should celebrate all the time, and we should continue to build that relationship and get them to be more in relationship with the Father, which is where we're going to go with these next couple of verses. And it's really interesting. So when I read the story for years, like, so the son leaves, son comes back, father welcomes him, yay, things are great. I like to stop the story there, because I get that part. That makes sense. But then Jesus continues to tell the story, and for the longest time, I was like, why is this second half of this story included in here? Why does Jesus continue to tell it? Verses 18, let's see, what was I at? 28 to 32. 28, sorry. I saw an 8. 28 to 32. I lost my place. Blah, blah. And he said to him, your brother has come, because he has received them. 24. 5, that was where I was at. I typed the wrong number in my notes. Fancy that. It happens. Verse 25. Now his older son was in the field, and as he came and drew near to the house, he heard music and dancing. And so he called one of the servants and asked what these things meant. And he said to him, your brother has come, and because he has received him safe and sound, your father has killed the fatted calf. See, but the brother was angry and would not go in. Therefore his father came out and pleaded with him. So he answered and said to his father, lo, these many years I have been serving you. I never transgressed your commandment at any time, and yet you never gave me a young goat that I might make merry with my friends. But as soon as this son of yours came, who has devoured your livelihood with harlots, you killed the fatted calf for him. And he said to him, son, you are always with me, and all that I have is yours. It was right that we should make merry and be glad, for your brother was dead and is alive again, and was lost and is found. So the second brother in the story, see, he stayed with the father and is not straight off. He's done what the father has asked of him, but is feeling jealous because his brother, who disrespected his father, basically looked at him and said, you're dead to me, is now being celebrated for coming home. And so you can see this in the conversation of how they react with one another. So the son says to the father, he labels his brother not as a brother, but as this son of yours came home for the celebration. He doesn't even recognize it. And then the father says, with this brother of yours, so you can see the difference in what they're doing there. And for the longest time, like I said before, I didn't fully grasp why this part of the story was added. Because I always looked at the perspective of this from the prodigal son. I never looked at the perspective of the father. And so I want to show you the perspective of the father quickly. I think verse 31 illustrates this great. The father gives a beautiful response. Son, you are always with me, and everything I have is yours. So the third point is this, is that a relationship with the father is not based upon what you do for him. It is based upon being with him. So a relationship with the father is not based upon what you do for him. It is based upon being with him. Don't get me wrong, doing things for God is not bad. In fact, it is commended. But the relationship is founded upon you being with God. See, the second son didn't understand that he had something the other son lacked. A relationship based upon being with the father. So the second son had never lost that relationship being with the father. And so the father, he celebrates when the other son returns because he is with him again. See, God desires for his children, for his people, to be with him. What is one of the names that Jesus is identified by? Emmanuel. What does it mean? God with us. Very good. See, God came to be with us so that we in turn could choose to be with him. One of my favorite things I like to say is, I'll ask people, hey, what is God's middle name? And I like to say, with is God's middle name. God with us. You see, some of us this morning, we treat a relationship with God like we treat our employer. For your employer, their satisfaction is based upon how much you get done. But for God, you should base your relationship not upon how much you do for him, but upon how much you are presently with him. So here's a little bit of person-to-person relationship advice. For any relationship, it will grow and flow based upon your witness with another person. I just made up another word. Witness. And that changes per person, but how much you are presently with them. So you want to try and build a relationship with someone, or rebuild a relationship, figure out what being with them will look like, and then do that. Because witness is what brings you together. And so I'll close on this thought, is that we have a forgiving Father. See, I don't know what your earthly father was like, but I do know what our heavenly Father is like. He forgives, he hopes, he loves, and he is with us. So the beauty in this is that God allows us to choose him or to choose something else. I would argue that choosing him is the better idea. And there's multiple reasons to do that. And then even if we stray, his eyes are upon us as he watches and he waits for us to come home. One more story I'll share real fast. when I was a younger Cody than what I was when I broke the window. I remember being in Walmart one time with my mom, and you know how kids can be where they stray off a little bit, right? It happens. And so I got lost behind a clothes rack. To me, I was lost. You'll see the mom's perspective in a moment. For me, I was lost behind a clothes rack, and I had lost sight of my mom. I was a little freaked out. I was like, where did my mom go? And you know how kids are. They kind of panic a little bit. Mom! And my mom was like, son, I can still see you. She said, son, I can still see you. I didn't ever lose sight of you. It's going to be okay. See, what we forget sometimes is that God never loses sight of us. Sometimes we have a little kid panic moment. But even if we stray, even if we get lost, his eyes are upon us as he watches and waits for us to cry out and come home. And then finally is that our relationship is not built upon what we do for him, but upon us being with him. So I would encourage you this morning, if your relationship with God is lacking a little bit, be with him a little bit more. Being with him can change your life for the better and change it forever. And so I want to play a song for you. You guys know the song Good, Good Father? You've heard that before. I think it illustrates this idea of how God works in our life. So we're going to play it, and then I'll come up and close in just a moment. But I want you, it's going to be on the screen. So if you know the song, feel free to sing along. It's up to you, or just meditate upon the idea of what the song is saying. And so that's what we're going to do in these next few moments.